again, it is Crew Call here on Motor Racing Network, presented by Flow Racing, the home of NASCAR roots. You can subscribe at www.flowracing.com, and this is a special edition of Crew Call, one merited because a crew chief is being inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Another crew chief is being inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame. It's not the first time it's happened, but joining a long list of special crew chiefs. That's what we celebrate here on Crew Call. I'm Steve Post, pit road reporter for Motor Racing Network, joined by a 25-time winning and championship-winning crew chief, Todd Gordon. And Todd, when they unveiled the class of 2023, another one of your guys, another crew chief, gets locked in with Kirk Shelmerdine. I'm assuming you approve of that, getting another crew chief into the Hall of Fame.
I started politicking for it when the list came out, and I just not from just the crew chief standpoint, but the stats.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at it, and the amount of wins, championships, 4 championships, 46 wins, won in 10 races. It's just astounding.
He won one in every 10 races.
He crew chief 460 races, won 46.
46.
That's pretty astounding. And I don't care who you got. I mean, he's started at James Hilton and ended his career as the leader of the most iconic team, I think through the 90s that there was in Dale Senior. So, be an awesome interview. I'm just giddy to get to talk to him. It's somebody I would look at as he's been an idol. As you grew up, you kind of watched what he did, and it's one that you aspire to be like.
Neat stuff, that's for sure. When you look at the crew chiefs that are inducted, the mechanics that are inducted, we have guys like Junior Johnson and Robert Yates that are very hands-on, but owners. But when you look at the guys that got in more with mechanical end of it, Dale Inman, Leonard Wood, Maurice Petty, Ray Evernham, Waddell Wilson, and Kirk Shelmerdine belongs in that group.
Yes.
No denying.
Yes, I when you looked at the list of who was up this year, I felt, and honestly, I could take my 2015 feelings aside. I think the current guys, Matt Kenseth and Kirk Shelmerdine, are by far they're the two that need to come in.
Absolutely. Herschel McGriff, part of that club, that class as well. So fun stuff, and we are going to talk to Kirk Shelmerdine. This show is Crew Call, presented by Flow Racing, the home of NASCAR roots. You can find NASCAR Wheel and Modifieds, the Arca Menard Series, the Pinty Series, and so much more. All of it at www.flowracing. Subscribe today. Stay with us. Kirk Shelmerdine when we return. Crew Call, presented by Flow Racing, the home of NASCAR roots, continues on. Recently, the NASCAR Hall of Fame announced their class of 2023, and among the inductees, a crew chief, a very successful crew chief, obviously a 4-time champion, Kirk Shelmerdine, and he joins us here on Crew Call. Hello, Kirk. Welcome into Crew Call.
Good morning, gents. I'm glad to be here.
Well, it is good to catch up with you. Really good to chat with you. The getting nominated, you've been through the process of being nominated and finally getting inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame. What has that meant to you?
Well, it's, I knew it would be a process and take a few years, and I thought it might take a couple more years than it has. Things happen kind of quickly this time, and it's been sort of a whirlwind since.
Yeah, definitely. It's got to be an emotional piece. As the nomination time came up and we're talking on radio, I was a pretty big supporter of you looking at your stats. I mean, you look back through it. You won 1 in 10 races that you crew chiefed. You started crew chiefing as a teenager, and youngest crew chief winner at the time at 25 years of age. 4 championships. I mean,
the numbers are Hall of Fame numbers.
The numbers, there's no doubt. To me, I felt like should have been first ballot, but amazing career. Talk about how a kid from Philly ends up down at James Hilton's race team.
My standard story is the judge said you can go be a racer or do the 30 days. I'm just kidding.
A lot of good stories have started what the judge said. So
yeah, I know. I used to tell people that because I try to discourage more youngsters from jumping into it, because I mean, I really just got lucky with the situation. A good friend of mine up in Delaware, Jack Whitby, used to be my neighbor, and uh, gave me my first job as just a helper when I was a teenager and things. And he knew some people with affiliated with NASCAR, and he'd been a racer a lot of his life. And he lined me up on getting my first job, which was with James Hilton, as you guys probably know, down in South Carolina. And it was sort of like jumping in the deep end and then learning how to swim afterwards. And I got a lot of experience in a hurry on just about all kinds of, every facet of things,
Were
from
you a
working on a truck to building engines and everything in between.
were you a mechanically inclined kid? Were you a kid that loved racing? What was the attraction to this type of work for you?
I was mechanically inclined, I guess. And I mean, every 17, 18-year-old's interested in cars back in those days anyway. I'd been a go-kart racer for a little while, pretty much on my own. So that was like one of those dream things. What do you want to be when you grow up? And for me, it was race car driver, and thousands of other kids too. Um, and it's kind of a pipe dream, but it sort of kept getting bigger. And the one huge step was getting into the NASCAR in the first place, especially like you said, a kid from the north, and was kind of I was surprised to be there, just like I'm surprised to be here today. At the time, it was an eye opener for sure. And you wish something hard enough, and then all of a sudden, bink, there you are. Takes a little adjusting.
I love it.
Yeah, definitely. So you come down as a teenager and you end up as a crew chief pretty quickly. How many guys did you have working with you there at Hilton's?
At the point I became a crew chief, as far as full timers, it was just me. So I got to choose my title.
Cool.
It's sort of like, the only guy left in town can be sheriff if he wants, I suppose. There were maybe 3 or 4 other full timers on and off. But things got a little thin there for a while, and I'd learned enough from the other guys in the first year or so while I was there that they trusted me, I think. And like I said, I was the last one standing. So I must have been tough or tough enough.
Yeah, exactly. One or the other. Yeah. Kirk, we talk to a lot of our present day crew chiefs, and I mean, a lot of them have college degrees, and then we talk to the guys that went to Frank Kimmel's race shop and learned everything, or this race shop, or this ARCA team, or this small team. When you look at your evolution as a crew chief, being with a team like James Hilton's team, being at you talked about, you even had to work on the transporter. You had to work on the truck. As you look at your big picture of your career, how important was that broad, general, do everything knowledge and work ethic that you had to have working at a small team like that?
It was absolutely invaluable. This was 1976. I'm a little afraid to say, but that was a different era. All of the pioneers that we talk about, and people that are on the walls in the Hall of Fame and stuff, those guys were still around, or a lot of them, and the way of doing things was kind of the same as back in the 40s and 50s, whenever it started. You needed a different part for the car than what came on it. We had to make the darn thing. You couldn't just go order something. It's just the whole methodology of it was you had to learn the basics, and then when things deviate from the basics and you start getting a little more fancy, you had to understand why those things happened and what they were, and what your reason behind it for doing it was, and then how you're going to do it. It was just a groundwork there that I don't think you could learn. You could have learned 15 or 20 years later, because that kind of way of doing things just sort of faded out, and it started to become a sport and a business. And back then it was your life. It was more art than anything else, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. You say 76, so you came through one of the first basically car changes that we had, because we came from the big cars down to a smaller mid-sized car in the late 70s, didn't we?
The big cars is saying a mouthful, because they were huge, and they were even the frame front to back was stock. Uh, you welded plates along the frame rails to make them solid, tubular, instead of a C shape, but it was still the stock frame that any other car in the junkyard nowadays has. I mean, the doors, the body panels, you had to weld them on and cover up where the door handles went, uh, slice the big old giant chrome bumpers and down and like narrow them, you know what I mean? And not make it visible at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Just stock cars were stock cars. And, before 1978 or whatever, everything out there was giant. I mean, probably wouldn't fit in your garage nowadays, a lot of weight, a lot of bad aerodynamics, you name it.
As a human race, we naturally don't like change. Okay, we're dealing with a change with the race car. We're dealing with the NASCAR now. But when you look at that 1978, you're the crew chief. You're working there. You've got all of the cars. You've got everything. You know what you're working on. Were you one of those resistant to change as the adjustments were made in NASCAR and adapting to the new stuff?
As a kid, you pretty much, as a youngster coming into something else that's established, or a new guy, and you start being ambitious or whatever, doing what you're going to do. You pretty much represent change, whether you like it or not. Yeah, I always hated it. And still do sometimes, especially as I get older. Every change is pretty much in the wrong damn direction. But you as teenagers, 20-year-olds, I mean, we'd listen to the old guys grumbling about how things aren't like they used to be, and all this and that is wrong, and not too long down the road, here we are doing the same thing.
You've become the old guy.
Yeah, and bitching about stuff. That's how they're doing it nowadays, But it's just part of life, I suppose. It's part of how things go, and especially when technology is involved, you're pretty much going from 0 to 100 in a couple of decades, and change is coming. I guess might as well embrace it. Try to hit it off, and that's kind of how I later on, as I got more experience and more responsibility and stuff, that's sort of how I wanted to do. I see here's the curve of what's changing, and here's where it's going. Let's see if we can't just go straight there.
Yeah.
And try to be ahead of them here and there. And for a few years there, it worked.
Yeah, it definitely did. It did for several years there. And a lot of that was your career at RCR. Talk about the transition, getting the opportunity to go to Richards, and then you got to work, I think, with Richard as a driver to start with, and then Ricky Rudd, and then Dale Sr. I guess Dale Sr., Ricky Rudd, then back to Dale Sr.
Exactly.
So talk about that transition, a great time in auto racing.
Oh, yeah, as you said, Richard was still driving his own car. He was an independent, just like James was. And he and James were pretty good friends. And Richard started out in modifieds and things, racing on the short tracks, and built it up to the top, to the Cup Series, and but still, he built his own engines. He do car stuff and business stuff during the daytime, and he'd go home and have supper, and then at night he'd come back and build engines all night. Nobody worked harder than guys like him in those days, and so the jump wasn't huge. I mean, and that's maybe why he wanted to hire me in the first place, because I'd been kind of pretty much a jack of all trades, I guess. Had a lot of experience at a lot of things, and all those things were necessary, And so at the time, it wasn't that much different of a team or a situation, but Richard had a lot of plans to continue to expand. And, after a year or two, they're starting to talk about downsizing the cars, and everybody's going to have new ones, shorter wheelbase and all this stuff. And so he says, well, why don't we build our own? We got to pay somebody to fix all these cars or else junk them and build new ones. I can't afford either one of those. Why don't we do our own chassis? And so that was the genesis of that. And this is right about 1980 now. So, Richard had a lot of plans and a lot of intuition, I think, about the future as well and what he wanted from it. And, we were all along for the ride at that point.
Yeah.
He made a lot of stuff happen, I think, just by sheer determination. And really, as far as crew chief goes from that point on, I mean, he was sort of an ace in the hole for me because he was there. He was handling the business stuff, which I'm terrible at. And, he kind of ran things, and I took care of the cars. And it made life simpler for both of us, I think.
How did
And he was there every day at the races. He could make the hard call when we were stuck on something. I mean, after all, it was his car and his team. And, if something was a toss up, Richard was there to make those calls. And not a lot of crew chiefs had that luxury, So, definitely he was an ace in the hole the whole time. And he taught me a whole lot of stuff as well.
Cool. And how was playing
Some of it I
intermediate?
learned immediately. Some of it I learned right away and just took his word for it. And other stuff I still had to go screw it up and find out why he was saying you should do this or that. And, I was a little more hard headed about some of it than others. But we got there.
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff he had told me and showed me, I didn't really realize the basis of it or why this was that way until years later when I had my own team. Then the little oh yeah moment comes, and so he was a big part of it.
And talk about not only with him being a pretty strong personality and being able to make those calls, but you had a driver on the other hand for 4 championships that was pretty strong-willed himself. You probably had to play a little bit of a peacekeeper between cases there, didn't you?
There wasn't a lot of fighting as far as that goes, but with a position like that, there's always politics, if you want to call it that. You can't just stomp and yell and say this is going to be this way, and that's it. You have to consider everybody's position and point of view, and so it becomes how can we make all this work and together, hand in hand. How can we make this, whatever our situation is with this chassis or a particular racetrack or engine stuff or the driver's preference. We knew Dale was the guy. I mean, there was no question. And so we had to give him as much of what he wanted as we could, because we knew what would happen if we did. It was, you got to see it.
Yeah.
He wanted to be in front of the other cars. That's where we go. This is us. So get there, make the cars so they'll do that, and he'll handle the rest. And in that essence of it was simple, but of course it wasn't simple. It was a lot of other things that had to go on, work in stride with all those other things.
Yeah, it sounds simple, but there's a lot of work. I want to talk.
Basically, it's simple, but it isn't easy. I guess.
Exactly. You're right.
That's well put.
It's simple on paper.
Yeah. There wasn't a lot of fighting. I mean, the goals were obvious. Everybody was looking in the same direction. The plane. We used to all ride in one plane. Once we finally got used to a plane. Home after the races, and an hour or two in the air, we had all our stuff debriefed by the time we got home. you could sit there and argue and yell, and there's nobody around to listen. Everybody would say what they got to say, and time we got back wheels down, we sort of had a plan for the next week and the next month and the next whatever, that helped us, our efficiency, I think. And, as things got bigger years later, this was tougher to do. You started had to have meetings and stuff, but and nobody was really fighting. Everybody's agenda was the same. And that's huge.
Yeah.
These days.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, you got everyone on the same page, that's for sure. You had a stint where you had Dale Earnhardt in the car, and then Ricky Rudd drove. You actually won 2 races with Ricky Rudd, and then Earnhardt came back. When did you just talked about give Earnhardt what he needs, and you're going to be in good shape? Had you seen that when you had that brief run with Earnhardt? Were you seeing that at that point, and kind of knew that if this thing ever came back around, we'd have something pretty good?
Well, it was sort of a getting to know period for everybody.
Yeah.
In the most intense spotlight you can think of, and we weren't really ready to be that caliber of team at the time. I mean, 3 months before that, we're barely getting by and not sure what's going to happen next. And then a truck backs up to the door with a whole lot of new parts and stuff in it, and we got a new driver and a sponsor, and holy Christ, here we go. And this happened from one week to the next. I mean, it was after, I think, a Talladega race, and then we had to be wherever the next week in this whole other persona, and it just didn't happen that quick. It took more time, and Richard and Dale had gotten pretty close personally through that time, and both realized that we're not ready yet. And if we continue under this much pressure and not have time to get things up to snuff, our success was not going to be anytime soon, and it may just hamper ever coming. We might just get too far behind. So, and this was, I guess, 1981.
Yeah.
And the chassis building thing is off the ground, but it's still very much just getting started, and we're trying to figure out what goes where and how we should. It's not something you can just design and go build it and be successful. Well, what if the design doesn't work? You got to build something else. And we were in that phase of, especially with the chassis and the setups and things, and just a general quality of the cars too. So the 2 years there with Ricky Rudd and Piedmont Airlines was a lot of transition period for us. A lot of building and a lot of experimentation. And Dale and Richard kind of made a deal like, let's be honest, we're not ready. You got some opportunities to go drive for some other big teams, and you should probably take them and let us get our stuff better first, and things settle out and contract terms end, whatever, we'll revisit coming back together.
That's
yeah, and Ricky was perfect for that kind of stuff, developing cars. I mean, he was really good at it. He's a really sensitive driver. He'd done a lot of road racing and short tracks and the big tracks too, with his own family team, and he had a good sense for that kind of stuff. And we'd say, well, we want to cut these roll bars out and put them somewhere else. And he said, yeah, go, let's try it. Let's do it now while we're still on the track, get the sawzall out. And, I mean, he was, he liked racing and getting every little tenth of a second you can out of the car. That developmental phase he was perfect for that. And he was really good at qualifying. I think we got a pole position once or twice even before we won a race. And Dale's not that patient with testing and practice, and everybody knows that now.
Yeah.
He would just be happy if you just showed up and raced, because the race part is why we're here. The race part is this is when I do my stuff. All the kind of boring repetition part where you're trying out 19 different shocks or whatever. Can't y'all guys get somebody else to do this part? Well, it was like, it was tougher. So just, again, one of those things that sort of luck kind of lined up and things worked out. And Piedmont Airlines was a local company here in town at the time in Winston-Salem. And, Richard pulled off another giant thing, right? But just kind of sheer will, I think. And we were able to build things up by the time 1984 came and Wrangler and Earnhardt returned.
That set up a great run for you guys.
Yeah,
I mean, just a phenomenal, and one that, I think really stoked what took NASCAR, almost national, and what a great run that was. People talk about
part of it's, like I say, part of it's the era too. We're going from, the factories and Winston had only been back in it a few years now, and this is a time when it's going from almost maybe this sport's going to go under to starting to become pretty doggone huge, just in that 5-6 years there, and then it got much more huge than we thought.
You started the explosion.
Yeah,
that's what happened there.
We were there to hear it. I don't know about starting it, but
10-4. People talk about the good old days of racing. How would you compare the racing you see today with what you crew chiefed?
I can't.
Yeah.
I don't watch it.
Oh, copy.
Really? Yeah.
I don't see any racing today. And what little bit I do see, a lot of it ain't racing. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a lot different. And here I am, one of the old guys bitching about things, just like
that whole thing of change, right?
70s, yeah. But it's different times. It's a different business. It's a different everything nowadays than it was.
Kirk, one of the things that you also really worked hard to develop was the pit crew, the Flying Aces. Your guys, I mean, they even had posters and video shoots and everything else. When did you realize, and the process of realizing that and kind of building that into what is today such a critical part of all motorsports, what was the lead up to that, the process to that, to focus on the pit crew?
I think that it's like free throws in basketball, I suppose. I mean, I don't know anything about basketball. I pretty much hate it, but like, you're getting a free shot to at least make up time on the other cars off of the track, maybe pass them, and basically just by not screwing up and wasting time is how it started out. Then, by the time you can weed out mistakes, then you start trying to knock, a little bit of time off here and there and see what you can do to improve it. But yeah, mostly it was like, it doesn't take horsepower. It doesn't take Earnhardt to be your driver. It doesn't take, some trick with aerodynamics or whatever. It's, you guys just don't trip over your feet. There's 5 lug nuts. You hit them 5 times. You don't have to hit each one 3 times before you even get the wrench on it straight. It was a kind of a slow down and speed up thing, really. And we started to get to where we could have the same guys every week doing the same positions. And, even at that point, a lot of the pit crews and a lot of the help, even at the shop, was weekend warrior guys that pretty much worked for beer, but some of those guys had been with Richard for a decade already or more. And they're a pretty experienced bunch too. More than some of us paid mechanics even. So you had to combine what they know, what you know, and what you think you can do with it. And it was just something we worked on, like building the cars. A lot of other teams didn't do it. They buy their chassis and go from there. It was something we wanted to look at. What's the sort of look at it under a microscope a little bit. What's the root of everything? What's basis for this and that, and what can we change without making it too much different. What can we do to make it faster?
Yeah,
And a lot of it was having the same guys. I mean, David Smith was the jackman for ever. I mean, he was the biggest, strongest guy. He was the one that could do it. He was fast on his feet. He had big, long legs and a strong back. Back then, the jack weighed almost 100 pounds.
Oof.
Just David was our center. He was our guy. He was the jack man, you know. And we just sort of hammered that stuff out. And then if we needed to be a little quicker in some area, it wasn't. Well, we need a new guy. You know, it wasn't. We were us already. This was our guys. So if we're gonna make things better, we do it.
Yeah.
And we all got bigger than we could have been individually, I think, for sure, just by being together, you know.
Yeah, you had chemistry amongst all the guys, so that they all knew what each other were doing and knew the motions that happened to it.
And I think you had to survive because it was such an intense life that never really stopped for years on end. I mean, okay, sleeping was necessary to still be able to function at some point. So that was part of the plan too. I mean, you know, you had to do everything at a sustainable level, but yeah, there's no room for argument or fighting or people that didn't get along or people didn't all believe the same, have the same objectives, you know. You just, in a few days, a new guy would fit in or he wouldn't.
Yes.
You knew
Didn't
that
take
quickly,
long.
yeah.
Well,
sure.
a few days was 48 hours,
Well,
right?
that's true, yeah.
Because you spent every waking hour together.
Well, half days are 12 hours, you know. So
Exactly. I love that. I love that.
Half days are
I've
12
used
hours.
that as well.
That is a great one.
That is a great one, and it's one that's lost today, I think. But so talk a little bit about the difficulty or lack thereof of the decision to step away at age 34 after 4 championships and so much success.
Oh man, it was something that had actually been in the back of my mind a couple of years. And I guess this can only happen when you've like won everything and then turn around and won everything again. And like, it sort of gets to be, there's nothing negative you can say about it, but you know, it's sort of like you're at the top of the mountain already. Okay. You know, you're off the ski lift and here we are. There's not many other places to go. And I was tired too. I was worn out, and I was 30 years old or whatever, 30 something years old, and had never, since I was a 17-year-old, been out from underneath one of those cars and looked around at the rest of life. You know, part of being as successful as we were, I mean, that was a requirement. It just, you had to focus every bit of you on that and nothing else, and a lot of other things suffer because of it, you know, family stuff. And I was married by then. We were, I think, 1990. I had a son, and he's already 2 now, and I kind of missed most of it. And so there was a lot of things that factored into it, but mostly I was worn out. And what do I do? Keep dragging ass just because, or do we maybe let somebody else take over? It's hard to say. And plus the 92, especially, it was the end of 92 season that I left. We almost didn't win a race. We ran like shit almost the whole year. I think Dale won the World 600, was the only one we won that year. And mostly because he was pissed off. At the 500-mile mark, we were like 12th. And I think he just decided he was going to outlast them. And, you know, attrition starts to be a factor that long of a race. And the drivers are all tired too. And I think Dale just got mad and decided he was going to win one which he was going to have this year. And that's kind of how it worked out. And we weren't fast enough. And I didn't really know what to do about it. Or, you know, I had some ideas, but when things go wrong, everybody starts to get ideas about, okay, this is what's wrong. This is what we need to change. And I just couldn't get on the same page. Before the jobs we had and the things we had to do, even 2 years out, was pretty obvious. I mean, this is for sure. This is the way we got to go. But now here's we won everything, and then we stopped winning everything, and then what's the plan for the next 2 years? I just couldn't get a vision of it, or at least not the same vision that other people had. And this starts to be a point in the business, the sport, where T-shirt sales are 6 and 8 times income-wise what the championship pays, with all the bonuses and everything. I mean, the whole sport's changed into something else that I didn't really recognize anymore. And I just said figured I was spent. I mean, I can't keep up this pace anymore, and it'd be detrimental to everybody else, the rest of you guys or whoever, if I kept trying, just because. So I was out, and it was a shock for everybody, I guess. And but it caused some stuff to happen. I think, new blood coming in, new ideas, new stuff that we've been hanging on to just because this is how we did it before. It was easier to let go. And Richard and I were still really good friends, and I think part of him understood where I was coming from. And I know he was upset, but he was upset, but he understood it too. And sometimes you can't have the arguments you need to have if you're close. And a new guy can come in and bang on people's desk and get this and that done, and nobody thinks anything of it. It didn't take so much argument. I think it was better for the team, and it was certainly better for me at the time. Would have been nice to keep, winning a dozen races every year. But that wasn't happening anymore. And, change had to come, and I figured I was part of it. And I guess it worked. They won a couple more titles right after. So
yeah. You mentioned back when we were talking about that teenager in Philadelphia, every dream is I dreamt about being a race car driver. Is that what the next chapter was? It was just, let me give my hand behind the wheel. You won a few ARCA races, you ran some cup races, and had your, is that kind of what that next phase was?
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Again, I'm completely involved and immersed in this sport that takes everything you have, and then when you stop, it's there was no time to make a game plan in between.
Makes sense.
But I had gotten to race some, and actually Richard and Dale were both behind it. I'd been, whatever the 4 or 5 weekends that we're not on the road, we're home here in Winston-Salem, I'd go race at Bowman Gray Stadium on Saturday night. Some friends of mine had cars that they've been running there, their family, pretty much forever. And, they knew the lay of the land there, and they had an extra car, and I'd go race some. And actually I won a couple. And then Humpy Wheeler came up with this sportsman division race, and at his track, Charlotte and Pocono and some other tracks. And another group of guys I'd gotten to know from way back in the Hilton days, they were building one of those cars. They wanted to go sportsman racing, and they weren't even going to do it unless I was involved, unless I was the driver. And I'd never been on anything bigger than the stadium as far as pavement goes, or maybe some road courses for go-karts, but
wow.
It was, talk about jumping in with both feet. That was something there. But again, Richard had been a racer his whole life. He understood that need in a young man. And they both said, as long as you get your work done here, we're, like on a race weekend at Charlotte, when there's other races going on, we change motors or we do whatever it is. We're pretty much waiting for that other events to get over with before we're back on the stage anyway. So, instead of sitting in the truck, I go out there and race. And that helped, I guess, fan the fire for things that came later. But that was really going to be the extent of my racing, and had nothing to do with me quitting. I mean, I didn't have a ride lined up somewhere, or I didn't know what I was going to do. I had a little garage. I had a fab shop. I went back there and put bodies on cars for people, just did other things. I didn't have a plan, which is something that's, I could probably say that a lot over a period of my career. But, once I didn't have a job, then other opportunities came up. And that next winter, the guys that had the sportsman car said, "Hey, we got a deal. We know where we can buy an ARCA car, and let's go race at Daytona." So here, I knew the setup stuff for all this. I mean, I felt like I could set up a car that was safe and everything was correct on it. I just had to learn how to drive it, but I didn't really have to spend a lot of time sorting the car out from scratch and learning to drive at the same time. I figured, well, the car's got to be pretty much right. If this isn't working, I got to change what I'm doing. It sort of made that simpler to figure out. But February '93, the next year, we're at Daytona. And that's a whole new chapter that started.
Really?
But one was because of the other, but one, I was able to race because I had left the other job, but I didn't leave the other job in order to race.
Right. It was related.
I pretty much decided long ago that my place in the sport was going to be Dale's crew chief. I mean, he's the best driver out there, and he's our driver. That's it. He's our driver. We're not, how am I going to say, "Hey, I want to be a race car driver," when we already got the best driver? And the crew chief stuff's working out pretty good. This is my little niche.
Yeah.
And so I pretty much decided that's where we are. But, when you get burned out, you get burned out.
No doubt. What occupies your time now, Kirk? What are you up to these days? What's your week look like now?
I don't know. I can't remember the last hour.
Nor can I. Welcome to the club.
Yeah. No, I have two teenage kids, and they just finished up middle school and elementary school. They're both going, sort of graduating up to a new school next year, and their grades are great. It's a lot just kind of running around with those guys and trying to keep up. I had my son here trying to set this Zoom thing up on a phone for me before we started. I got stuck right away. But yeah, I mean, being a dad for the second time around here is a lot of fun, and the hours go by pretty quick.
That is a life lived well, being a dad right now. That really, truly is neat stuff. Finally for you, Kirk, when I look at mechanics inducted into the Hall of Fame, Dale Inman, Leonard Wood, Maurice Petty, Ray Evernham, Waddell Wilson, and Kirk Shelmerdine. That's a pretty good club you have joined in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, every time something comes up like that, or in the record books or whatever, you look at the names, and some of those names were there when I was a kid, reading magazines, like Smokey Unick and Junior Johnson and Dale Inman and Leonard Wood, two of my big heroes. And all of a sudden I'm in their world, talking to them on a first name basis, and like for the next 25 years, I was right in there with them. It still seems kind of surreal.
No doubt. And you are enshrined, or will be enshrined in January, in the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Kirk, it has been an absolute pleasure spending time with you. We appreciate you spending some time with us here on Crew Call. Congratulations on the honor, and enjoy the time with those kids. Man, I'll tell you what, you are living right. We appreciate the time.
Yeah, they don't know anything about all this racing stuff, really. It's like, yeah, Dad's talking about old cars again, and stuff that happened back in the 1900s. So, I mean, maybe some of this will help them appreciate a little bit who their dad is or was, anyway.
Neat stuff.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
All right.
You got it. Kirk
Well, it's
Shelmerdine.
great to be with you. And I appreciate you having me.
You got it. Thank you, my man. Congratulations again. Kirk Shelmerdine.
All right. Thanks.
NASCAR Hall of Famer, the class of 2023, joining us here on Crew Call. Stay with us, more in just a moment. It is Crew Call, a special edition, talking NASCAR Hall of Fame. The show is presented by Flow Racing, the home of NASCAR roots. Subscribe at www. I need a few more W's there. FlowRacing.com. I got tongue twisted because when we turned off the recording device for Kirk Shelmerdine, you and I looked at each other and it was just kind of like, wow.
Oh my God. Oh, what an interview. And just what a wealth of knowledge and giving the history. To being the teenage crew chief for James Hilton and the only guy that was on the payroll. It's and the talk of, there was so much I learned out of the Dale coming to RCR, then them separating and coming back when they feel like they're ready to race together. Oh my God.
Yeah. You had Dale there, but Dale known to hate practice and testing.
Yes.
Ricky Rudd loves the nut and bolt things in 17 different shock packages, and for 2 years, Ricky Rudd kind of works to get things established there. And then then Dale Earnhardt comes back home with Wrangler and all of that. One of the points that I just found fascinating, I love a lot of the simple analogies he made. And when we talked about the pit crew, he referred to it like a free throw in basketball.
Yeah. Opportunity to make stuff when everybody else isn't, right?
Which we live in that world today, but in that era,
nobody thought of that.
Nobody thought of that.
Forward thinking about everything.
Yeah.
Building their own chassis in the 1980s.
Forward thinking.
Forward
thinking, worthy of the Hall of Fame.
The reason why back-to-back championships twice as a crew chief.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, it's tough to do one time, let alone back-to-back twice.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really neat stuff. So we really appreciate Kirk Shelmerdine joining us, and thanks to our friends at the NASCAR Hall of Fame, our buddy Winston Kelly, kind of getting us hooked up with Kirk. And I'll just be completely honest with this. We did the interview, and it's like, where does this fit in? This fits in as special edition.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Because it's special. It really, truly is.
I'm giddy about the interview we got to do.
Yeah.
And what a plethora of information and understanding. This is like, I would love if we could put this in throwback weekend at Darlington, because it was like throwback to where the sport came from.
Yeah.
And what a phenomenal.
Fun stuff.
I just thoroughly enjoyed it.
Really, really enjoyable, that is for sure. We hope you enjoyed it as well. Our special edition of Crew Call with 2023 NASCAR Hall of Fame inductee Kirk Shelmerdine. He will join Matt Kenseth and Herschel McGriff. I was going way off the reservation. I was out on the West Coast earlier this month and spent some time at the West Coast Stock Car Motorsports Hall of Fame. Ken Clapp is one of the guys out there, and they were giddy. They were as giddy as you are about Kirk going in, about Herschel going in. Yeah. And that's what the Hall of Fame is. That is what the Hall of Fame is, and we really do appreciate what Winston Kelly and his staff do down there in Uptown Charlotte. So thanks again to Kirk Shelmerdine for joining us here on Crew Call. More important than all of that, though, thank you for joining us here on Crew Call, presented by Flow Racing, the home of NASCAR roots. Subscribe today at www.flowracing.com.